Afternoon, and thanks very much, Maurice. I'm delighted to be here with you. I think you had a very long day, 2 very long days, and I hope you'll manage to stay awake for me. And I know you've been exploring relationships in different ways, and I suppose it's so important because if childcare is about anything, it's about relationships, different kinds of relationships. What I'm speaking about is something broader, but it's about relationships. I'm talking about social justice for all our children. And social justice is about relationships. It's about right relationships with ourselves, with each other, with our family, with our community, with our society, and with the universe. Am I near enough to it? Thank you. So I'm going to kind of touch on some of those very broadly. I suppose just to say that the most basic necessity for any human being is a home. It should be a right. It isn't a right in our society. And there are many people without a home. Many children without a home. And I'm not just talking about the children who are in the care of the state. I'm talking about children who are homeless right now in Ireland. When I started Focus Ireland, there were 4,500 households on the housing waiting list. In 2005, there were 42,000 households on the housing waiting list. Today, there are 100,000 households on housing waiting lists. That means there are 100,000 households in Ireland in insecure accommodation. Last week, there were 320 families in bed and breakfast. 160 of those families were in hotel rooms. An average of 45 families lose their home every month in Dublin. That's at least 10 children are losing their home every week. That figure is double the number of last year, and that is double the number the previous year. So far this year, 800 children have become homeless in Ireland. According to the latest Counted In study, which is the study that's used by the government to count in the number who are homeless, they maintain that 1 in 7 people who become homeless in Ireland is a child. And why did this happen today? It happens largely because we haven't provided social housing in Ireland over the past 10 years. We've provided a lot of housing. We've had the biggest house building programme in the history of the state, but they were not for people who couldn't afford to buy. There wasn't housing built for those who couldn't afford to buy. There was no social housing built. And so the waiting list got longer and longer. And so more and more families are dependent on the private rented sector. And in recent times, the rents have gone sky high, and the rent supplement that family gets has not kept pace with the market. And so families are losing their homes in the private rented sector. On top of that, there are a lot of landlords. We estimate about 30,000 landlords at the moment are in mortgage arrears. That means they're on the verge of getting out, which means there are that many tenants who are at risk. And there are that many children. Child homelessness is a new phenomenon in Ireland, but it is a shocking indictment of a government's response to economic recession. I suppose what is really upsetting when we meet them every day, as I do, not exactly every day, but some days in the week, when they come, whole families come, hoping that you'll get them a place for the night, hoping you'll get them a room where they can spend the night. And I've seen families, I've seen parents asking their friends to take their children so that they could sleep rough. I've seen families sleeping in cars because they had no place to go. Small children who are traumatized, parents who are broken, distraught. This is a daily occurrence. And because there isn't enough accommodation, we place them in bed and breakfast. And you have large families, maybe living in one room, with no facilities to cook, no facilities to play. Sometimes not having a bathroom, and the bathroom may be on the other landing in that hotel. And I had a woman the week before last who said that she had 5 little children. And when the youngest woke up in the middle of the night, she wanted to go to the toilet, she had to wake up all the other children and cart them all down to the next landing because she was afraid to leave them on the room because she didn't know who was in the room next to them. That's the kind of situation that we have for some families in Ireland. And these are the hidden homeless. These are the invisible people who walk the streets like you and I, but we don't notice them. But there's a great divide between us and them. And the divide is not only between the poor and the rich, but it's a divide between those of us who have a reasonable amount of stability in our lives and those who have none, who don't know where they will be today, who don't know where they will be tomorrow, who don't know where they will be the next day. The situation in which they find themselves is not only extremely stressful, but it's also totally unsuitable and totally unacceptable. That is the situation with regard to housing and homelessness. If we look at the children in another way, and as well as needing a home, children need the basic necessities of life. We've always had poverty in Ireland, and family poverty and child poverty. Even during the Celtic Tiger years, we had children living in what is called consistent poverty, which means dire poverty, without the basic necessities of life. Today, we still have children living in consistent poverty. We have 10%, 1 in every 10 child is living in consistent poverty. But what is even more alarming is the research that was published last week by UNICEF, which showed that the situation in Ireland is that Irish families with children over the past year have lost equivalent to what is 10 years of income progress. So children living in poverty has increased by 10% over the past 5 years, from 18% to 28%. That's over a quarter of our children are living in income poverty. They're living below the poverty line. That means in real terms that now we have 130,000 more children living in poverty today than there were 5 years ago. Okay. You think they can't hear me? Okay, it's fine. Oh yes, better. Okay. Poverty is always tragic. It's always a tragedy, but child poverty is especially devastating because children living in poverty are likely to become impoverished adults who also have poor children. And so you have the intergenerational cycle of poverty. And that's what happens, and that is what's happening. And I have seen it over my years. Third generation of families and fourth generation living in poverty. What is equally disturbing is that it continues. In the recent budget, a single person on 75,000 will receive an increase of €14.30 a week. That's €14.30, while an unemployed single person gets an increase of 90 cents. That is the continuation of inequality. Or an unemployed couple, where if they're earning, an unemployed couple will receive an extra €1.51, while a couple earning €125,000 will receive €23.57 a week. So it's inequality continuing and poverty continuing. And I know you've discussed the situation of children in care, and I'm not going to say very much about it, except that we all know that the system is broken. We all know the childcare system is inadequate. And it's a sad reality and a harsh reality that a child found tonight to be in urgent care may not get the support of a social worker because it isn't a priority for the government. We know that 9,000 cases of children at risk are waiting to be seen by a social worker, and some of them might never be seen unless their situation escalates to what is regarded as an emergency crisis. For children in care today, the whole idea, which was very much part of child care in the past, and I know even myself involved in it 40 years ago, 30 years ago, the whole concept of planning appropriate placements was critically important. That doesn't seem to be critically important anymore. The budget is the new mantra, and whether it fits into the budget. And the instability that is caused by the cutbacks, the instability of centres being closed and children and staff being moved around and staff being replaced by agency staff because that is cheaper, that kind of instability will have an enormous effect on those children and hugely affect the future, their future. Our children and children's children will ask us in the future, how did we let these things happen? How did we tolerate such pain and suffering for children? On top of that, and I know you've discussed this, is that when children in care reach the age of 18, they're abandoned, literally abandoned. Focus Ireland, which works with children leaving care, at least it's the biggest organisation working with children leaving care in Ireland. Out of the 100 young people who've left the care of the state, who are with them at the moment, almost 40% of them are currently homeless or in insecure accommodation. 10 of these are in the homeless services. Another 28 are in insecure positions, such as sleeping on friends' couches to keep them off the street. This is a tragedy waiting to happen. These are very vulnerable children, and all children are vulnerable, but these are particularly vulnerable. And there's nothing new about talking about aftercare. And you've talked about it, and I know Maurice has done so much work around it. But you know, if you go back 44 years, this was a big chapter in the Kennedy report, where they talked about aftercare being integrated into childcare. That was part of residential care, and the importance of having accommodation that would lead people back into society. And they used terms like release hostels. It was seen as vitally important then, and yet today we have this awful situation. And it's not just children leaving care that are neglected, but young people who are unemployed at the moment. Since their welfare has been reduced to €100 a week, many of them who have difficulties with their parents or difficulties at home are ending up homeless. They're driven into homelessness by the state. The other group of children, of course, that are really treated as second-class children are the children in direct provision. 1/3 of the residents in direct provision are children. That's 1,660. And a huge concern is the fact that they are really basically spending their childhood in a hostel, in a room, where they have, their parents cannot be seen as role models because they're not even allowed to work. Direct provision is anything but a natural family environment. There's confined spaces, unhygienic living areas, children sharing bathrooms with men and women who they don't know, children living in one room with their entire family, or indeed sharing it with another family, different genders sharing the same room, teenagers and young adults share rooms with their parents, children exposed to violent and sexual behaviour. These are facts. This is reality. And on top of that, when some of those children are trying to make a go of life, they're not even allowed to access third-level education. They're treated as international students. And of course, the fees for international students are far too in excess of what any of these children could afford. But even when some of them get a scholarship, because many of those children, when they reach the age of 18, are transferred from their placement into another direct provision hostel in another part of the country, far away from where they got their scholarship to attend third-level education. These are just some of the facts. These are just some of the things that concern me when I think about justice for children, when I think about right relationships for children. And they raise serious questions about what have we learned from the past? What, if anything, have we learned from the Ryan report? What, if anything, have we done to ensure that all our children are cherished and protected equally? When we know the way the children are suffering now, and when we are not outraged by it, when we as a society don't even think about what is happening to those children, that it doesn't even cause a ripple of disquiet. We are complicit with what's happening. We are part of it. We are part of the same society. We are responsible. Children of the past were abused because they were considered to be of no value. They were demonized as illegitimate or troublesome or just poor. And this has made it possible for society to collude with that abuse. And I suppose we will continue to have children in the situations I described until we change our attitude towards children who can't be cared fully by their parents. Until we see all these children as our children, we will not cherish them equally. So when we think about social justice, and we think about right relationships, we have to think of how can we do this differently. If we can agree that every child born in our society deserves what it needs, then we're signing up to social justice. Because that is the essence of what justice is about. It's about meeting everyone's needs as a right, providing for everyone, not according to their income level, not according to their social status, not according to the colour of their skin or their cultural identity, but according to their needs and their circumstances. As a society, we are rather muddled about what it is we're prepared to provide for our children. And we need to think about how we plan for our children. We need to rethink our whole approach and to accept and implement not just change, but what amounts to a revolution with regard to our children. And that is where I think you must give the lead. You who know more about children than most, you must help to lead society and help society to understand that there really needs to be a revolution with regard to our attitude towards our children. This has to be thought through and planned for. Planning is never a strong point in Ireland. And that is because our political system tends to be short-term in its thinking. But we now have to rethink it, and we have to overhaul our infrastructures and create infrastructures that support social justice. And this will require a seismic change in our attitude to children. And that is why I think that you must help us to revision our nation as a socially just society where all our children are regarded as equal, not just theoretically by the Constitution, but in fact, in practice, by the nation and the state, by the church and all the institutions, by all the structures, not just in theory, but in fact. That change, I believe, can take place. We have seen extraordinary changes taking place in Ireland. Extraordinary changes. But we have not seen extraordinary changes taking place with regard to our children, and particularly with regard to our disadvantaged and vulnerable children. And change, our thinking must change. And if our thinking changes, as Belinda was saying, our feelings change, our actions change. What we have to do is change the thinking. And that's my challenge to you today. Thank you.